Please subscribe to our channel, Pacific Front Untold, and be sure to leave a comment after watching a video. In his book Malabar, William Logan explores how famine repeatedly impacted this historical district in India, while also chronicling its history and culture. Famine-related epidemics and large-scale mortality were especially persistent in Malabar during British colonial rule. British documents about this acknowledge that an artificial famine was possible since the district continually failed to produce sufficient grains for its domestic population, and further emphasized that technological advancements in sea, road, and rail transport should have made famine practically impossible. However, historical records have shown that Malabar experienced repeated famines during British rule because of severe weather-related conditions, imperial indifference, and a failure to undertake famine prevention activities, with famines occurring during 1865, 1876, 1891, and 1896. Much of the British response to famine was administrative in nature, such as restrictions on private community kitchens and other charitable organizations. This was followed by an increase in taxes and duties on the upper classes, which curtailed their ability to provide charitable food assistance. William Logan's 2-volume historiography was published only 8 years after the 1876 famine. Therefore, claims in his book stating that there was no famine after 1727 cannot be considered as mere oversight, but rather a deliberate attempt on the part of British authorities to conceal the truth. Malabar was ceded to the British by the Treaty of Srirangapatna. It was considered one of the districts of the Madras Presidency and one of the richest districts in that region of India. However, food production was generally poor during normal years when compared to neighboring districts, and also adversely impacted by severe flash flooding during the monsoon season, which often resulted in the complete destruction of standing crops and food stocks. Under British colonial administration, the district became increasingly handicapped in its ability to produce enough food, even during years with better harvests, since large areas of Malabar were being converted into plantation estates. When the Second World War began in September 1939, the persistent economic conditions in the district led to significant price increases in basic commodities, which largely impacted the peasants and workers living there. This situation was further exacerbated by the government's lack of focus on food production during wartime. Additionally, Malabar was largely dependent on neighboring Burma for the majority of its food supply, so when Japan captured Burma in 1942, it adversely affected the import of rice into Malabar. Furthermore, the primary rice supply was also diverted for military purposes instead of civilian consumption. With the onset of war, statistics show that the import of rice to Calicut fell considerably from an annual average of 32,000 tons to a mere 13,000 tons in February 1941. After a massive cyclone in 1940, rivers overflowed and resulted in over 1,000 acres of paddy land near the town of Shirkal being filled with silt and rendered unusable. This also led to typhoid epidemics in the towns of Burgra, Talasari, and Kanori. To avoid criticism for failing to maintain public health within the district, government officials arranged for the sick to be loaded on trains and transported out of Calicut. Even as the district medical officer requested more medical aid, the necessary finances were not provided, with colonial officials noting that it is not possible for anyone to die of starvation in Malabar because of the gifts of nature and the charitable disposition of the people. Later in 1943, the food situation became so critical throughout the rest of the country that a Food Grains Policy Committee was established by the Indian government to arrange for a more equitable distribution of food among the provinces. The Grow More Food campaign was launched by the committee with the intention of achieving a substantial increase in food production through several avenues, including increased farming areas, new irrigation projects, and double crop cultivation. None of these efforts, however, resulted in substantial improvement in the food crisis. Simultaneously, the fund drive to support the war effort also continued in full operation, and by January 1941 had reached a total of more than 7 million rupees. As wartime spending took money away from agricultural improvements, this further deteriorated the food situation and increased the population's overall economic distress. In 1943, another famine occurred in Malabar, followed by several famine-inflicted epidemics that devastated the region, including cholera, plague, and smallpox, along with many other diseases that resulted in a high mortality rate. Several newspapers, including the Liberator out of Calicut, wrote about the severity of the situation and reported deaths of nearly 100,000 people. British officials merely declared that it was a gross exaggeration of the facts, while many books and articles detailing this incident dispute official colonial records. The British colonial administration in Malabar appeared to take little interest in providing healthcare services to the local population. In spite of claims in official reports and various officers stationed there for this purpose. Although district health department staff visited villages on a regular basis to conduct lectures and provide some medical assistance, this was wholly inadequate to combat the health issues that plagued cities and towns within the Malabar district. The events that unfolded under British colonial rule in Malabar often demonstrated a utilization and exploitation of resources at the expense of the local population. This often created conditions that resulted in artificial famines, which were further aggravated by serious outbreaks of cholera and other diseases, and ultimately the government's failure to intervene on behalf of the people to prevent starvation and death.